Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's talk, Trauma in Digital Spaces, The Future of Holocaust Remembrance, features Dr. Rachel Baum, who's Deputy Director of the Sam Helen Stahl Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York, is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement. This is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, economic, psychological, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. Today's event is part of the 2022-23 KHC and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Trauma, Remembrance, and Compassion. It's also connected to the KHC's newest virtual and in-person exhibition, The Concentration Camps, Inside the Nazi System of Incarceration and Genocide. Our event today is co-sponsored by the Sam and Frances Freed Holocaust and Genocide Academy at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center, the Ray Walpole Institute at Western Washington University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College, and the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University. And one final housekeeping note, please be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now, to kick things off, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ilse Schreinemakers, one of this year's KHC NEH Faculty Fellows. Dr. Schreinemakers is an Associate Professor of English at Queensborough Community College, where she serves as Deputy Chair and primarily teaches first-year composition courses. She's also the recent recipient of a Teresa Velarde Scholarship to attend Bard College's Institute for Writing and Thinking. Dr. Schreinemakers, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rachel N. Baum, Deputy Director of the Sam and Helen Stahl Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she teaches courses on the Holocaust, film, and Jewish culture. She has presented her work on technologies of Holocaust memory at conferences in Tel Aviv, Southampton, Berlin, Los Angeles, and elsewhere. She is also co-director of the Weinstein Holocaust Symposium, an international interfaith group of Holocaust survivor scholars and educators that has met since 1996. And finally, a small anecdote to finish this introduction. Rachel's seminal article, What I Learned to Feel, The Emotions of Holocaust Education, was published in 1996. According to Google Scholar, this one article has almost been continuously cited by scholars for over 25 years. In that article, Rachel describes, and I quote, the thin line in Holocaust education to move between hope and despair, action and stagnation. And that, quote, memory is an ongoing social action. Today, we explore modern technology's impact on this thin line and memory as social action. Our colloquium series, Trauma, Remembrance, and Compassion, explores trauma both historically and contemporarily, and how remembrance and compassion both have and continue to offer meaningful responses to atrocities. The floor is yours, Rachel.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and that ties so well into the themes that I want to discuss today. Let me share my screen. So let me start by saying that it is an absolute pleasure to be the inaugural speaker of this year's NEH Colloquium. My thanks to the Kupferberg Holocaust Center for the invitation, and of course, to all of you for being here today. I'll speak for about 35 minutes, and I've divided my talk into 4 sections to create some resting points, especially useful on Zoom. I'll begin by introducing the holograms of Holocaust survivors as a digital space, and then I'll look in turn at the themes of this year's colloquium. Trauma, Remembrance, Compassion. On March 20,
Can I
Don't
ask you
talk
some
yet.
questions?
Sorry, she wasn't supposed to speak yet. On March 27th, 2022, the American news show 60 Minutes re-aired its interview with Holocaust survivor Aaron Elster. It was, interviewer Leslie Stahl said, unlike any interview they had ever done. Aaron Elster, after all, had died 2 years before the interview. Stahl was, in fact, speaking with a hologram of Elster. Now let me show you just a short bit of the interview.
You can ask me anything you want, within reason.
Our interview with Holocaust survivor Aaron Elster, who spent 2 years of his childhood hidden in a neighbor's attic, was unlike any interview we have ever done.
Aaron, tell us what your parents did before the war.
They owned and operated a butcher shop.
It wasn't the content of the interview that was so unusual.
Where did you live?
I was born in a small town in Poland called Sokow Podlaski.
It's the fact that this interview was with a man who was no longer alive. Aaron Elster died 2 years ago.
What's the weather like today?
I'm actually recording. I cannot answer that question.
The survivors?
Interestingly, this was the third time in the prior 2 years that 60 Minutes aired this episode about the holographic projects. The episode originally aired on April 5th, 2020, just weeks after the outbreak of the global pandemic. Then it was rebroadcast at the end of August, 5 months into the pandemic. The world had become digital in new ways, with virtual meetings, religious services, weddings, and even funerals. So in many ways, it was a perfect time for 60 Minutes to highlight a new form of the virtual, speaking with a Holocaust survivor after his death. The project that created Aaron Elster's holographic projection, USC Shoah Foundation's Dimensions in Testimony, represents the first significant new mechanism of recording, screening, and interacting with Holocaust testimony in decades. It wasn't simply that previously recorded images of Aaron Elster were used to create the hologram. Rather, Mr. Elster answered hours of questions surrounded by cameras in order to capture three-dimensional images. The project, a collaboration between USC Shoah Foundation and USC's Institute for Creative Technologies, draws on natural language technology, also developed at USC, to enable the hologram to respond to the audience's questions. USC's hologram is both a new genre and paradigmatic. A new genre because of the patented technology that makes the Aaron Elster hologram possible, and the confluence of technology, funding, and human talent that is centered at the University of Southern California. But the Aaron Elster hologram and its interview by Leslie Stahl paradigmatically raises questions that will shape the future of Holocaust remembrance and the recording and distribution of other life histories. Questions raised specifically by digital technology. How can we use digital spaces to remember? How can we responsibly use technologies that allow us to simulate reality? In addition to the holograms, we can consider virtual reality that allows us to experience physical spaces, such as Anne Frank's Annex or a concentration camp. The fact that the first 60 Minutes episode was finished only weeks before the global pandemic sent so many of us home is coincidence. But the existence of the holograms of Holocaust survivors right now is not coincidence at all. They were created intentionally as a way of continuing to preserve Holocaust memory after the death of the last Holocaust survivor. They are one answer to a question that has consumed Holocaust organizations. What will we do when there are no more first-person witnesses? In today's talk, I offer a way of thinking about these digital technologies of Holocaust remembrance, one that looks beyond the newness of new media to ask how we can best bring our human commitments and experiences to digital spaces. Because of time, I will focus my comments on the holograms, but the argument I make is relevant for other digital spaces, which perhaps we can explore in the question and answer. So let me begin by introducing you to the holograms and talk to you about what it means to humanize digital spaces. Both the holograms and virtual reality experiences are included in USC Showa Foundation's Dimensions in Testimony, a project that aims to record and display testimony in new ways that will continue to engage audiences into the future. USC Showa Foundation is home to the largest repository of Holocaust testimonies, over 54,000. The foundation was started by Steven Spielberg in 1994 out of a recognition that the number of living witnesses of the Holocaust was getting smaller every year. The foundation trained citizens to interview Holocaust survivors and sent them into survivors' homes with film cameras. As the technology improved, the Showa Foundation set about digitizing their collection, a process completed in 2012. Digitization allowed for greater permanence and also allowed the Showa Foundation to make many of the testimonies available on the internet. This is important to note because despite their innovation, the holograms are an extension of prior projects. When we think about digital spaces of memory, holograms and virtual reality are perhaps the most dramatic. But we can also think about the digitizing of archives, testimonies, and artifacts as ways in which Holocaust memory is increasingly held in digital spaces. Because the holograms are so new, it can be easy to forget that they and other digital spaces of Holocaust memory live in relationship to earlier expressions. As media historian Lisa Gittleman writes, the introduction of new media is never entirely revolutionary. New media are less points of epistemic rupture than they are socially embedded sites for the ongoing negotiation of meaning as such. The holograms are a new way of engaging with the experiences of survivors, but are connected to previous media of survivor testimony. I use the word hologram to describe these projections, and USC Showa Foundation called them holograms in the beginning as well. But they have moved away from that language, in part because the holograms are not actually true holograms, but rather near holograms, but also to emphasize that the testimony rather than the technology. Today, USC Showa Foundation calls these interactive biographies because the viewer can ask questions and receive an answer from the holographic projection about the survivor's life. I call them holograms as a shorthand here, and because this is how they are discussed in the news. Currently, the holograms can be seen at a variety of US museums, but the interface of these holographic images are quite different. In the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City, the holographic survivors were seen on large 4K screens. The Holocaust centers in Skokie, Illinois, and in Dallas, Texas, show the holographic survivors in specially designed theaters that use mirrors to enable Pepper's ghost, the optical illusion that creates the three-dimensional appearance of the projections. Here, the audience sits in a darkened room in rows, and only one survivor projection takes the stage at a time. You can also now talk to the interactive biographies on the internet through USC Showa Foundation's Eyewitness. This removes the full holographic effect, but retains the ability to ask questions using your voice. I have a still image here, but on the actual site, you can see Pinchas Guter's eyes blinking as the projection waits for you to ask a question. I mention these different presentations of the holograms to emphasize that the experience of each is quite different for the viewer, as each positions the viewer's body differently, whether standing before a screen, sitting in a dark room, or accessing a database from home. This highlights that while my title refers to digital spaces, our physical selves engage with those spaces and are, in fact, required. Each of these examples represents what Lisa Gittleman calls inscriptions, creations of social meaning that require a human being to make legible. The holograms blur the boundary between past, present, and future, in that they are a recording about the past, viewed in the present, but created for the future. A future in which it will no longer be possible to ask questions of living survivors. We can't know how future generations will experience these projections, whether they will be one of many holographic interactions or whether they will seem dated and stilted. But what we do know is that they require significant investment in the present, not only very significant financial resources, but the human investment of creativity, time, and energy. Aging survivors traveled to Los Angeles to sit in front of multiple cameras on a hot stage for a full week in order to make these holograms. Seeing this investment becomes part of humanizing the technology. In my talk today, I offer a call for humanizing technologies by bringing compassion and a trauma-informed concern for vulnerability to our digital remembrance practices. Digital spaces are often seen as a safer home for memory, a way to overcome the vulnerability of human beings with their limited memories and lifespans. But it's not only that this isn't true, that digital spaces don't last forever. More to the point, seeing digital spaces as invulnerable detracts from Holocaust memory itself. It's by carrying our concern for human vulnerability into digital spaces that we can best use them to remember the Holocaust. So let us turn now to considering trauma, and specifically trauma-informed care for digital spaces. I begin with the 60 Minutes interview from 2020 to ground this technology in a particular time and space. It is easy to decontextualize technologies, to see them untethered from the human bodies who create and experience them in a particular time. The language of trauma has been a significant discourse in the study of the Holocaust for decades. In more recent years, there has been a greater concern for what is called trauma-informed approaches to medicine, education, social work, and other fields. This is a way of recognizing the histories that bodies carry, some from genocide and war, and others from different traumas. In today's talk, I want to hold both the specificity of Holocaust trauma and the broader approach of being trauma-informed. Looking at the holograms with a trauma-informed gaze means seeing not only the trauma of the past, but the trauma of the present. It means asking, what does it mean to experience these holograms now? We often treat digital spaces as if they were disconnected from history, and it's important to resituate them as historically inflected spaces. We know this intuitively, especially those of us old enough to have outlived some technologies and to have seen the birth of new ones. We know that technologies have a lifespan and a history, but we often interact with them as if they do not, in part because we're so close to them. And we too have a history and a lifespan that we bring to the digital spaces we inhabit. We began our time together today with a land acknowledgement, noting the trauma that shapes the spaces we inhabit. Although we are not in the same location, my home, Milwaukee, also holds this trauma, as Milwaukee, the good land, is on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homeland. We share trauma, although not equally, because George Floyd was murdered almost 2.5 years ago. His murder was recorded on a cell phone by the teenager Darnella Frazier, brutal footage which made visible the extreme vulnerability of Black bodies. We share trauma, although not equally, through the war on Ukraine and the vulnerability of human beings, families, and ways of life. We share trauma, although not equally, because of the pandemic. We share trauma, although not equally, because of the vulnerability of democracy. We don't leave this trauma behind when we study the Holocaust or when we engage with the hologram of a survivor. The question of how to respond to trauma, one's own and that of others, is an essential question for us to ask right now. And it is also a core question raised by the Holocaust. Any project of Holocaust education must confront loss. In framing my conversation about digital spaces through larger contexts of trauma and vulnerability, I am intentionally connecting the Holocaust to other narratives and experiences of loss, violence, and peril. If we are to move towards compassion, the final of our three themes, we must find ways to talk to each other across our experiences of trauma, vulnerability, and loss, and to use technologies in ways that make this more possible rather than less. We often think about technology as an answer to vulnerability. Darnella Frazier made George Floyd's death visible with her phone camera, which eventually led to the conviction of his murderer. But Darnella Frazier's filming of George Floyd's murder traumatized her and made her vulnerable in new ways. Furthermore, the murder was captured via a cell phone whose footage might have been confiscated, deleted, or corrupted. Similarly, it might be easy to see the holograms as a response to the vulnerability of human bodies, an answer to the eventual loss of survivors. But they are also a traumatic symptom of vulnerability, not only of human bodies, but of Holocaust memory itself. On September 16th, 2020, just 2 weeks after the 60 Minutes interview, the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, the Claims Conference, released the results of the Holocaust Knowledge and Awareness Study. The survey focused on Holocaust knowledge in the United States among adults under 40. The Claims Conference announced that it was the first ever 50-state survey on Holocaust knowledge among millennials and Gen Z. The executive summary of the report states that the findings show a substantial lack of personal connections to the Holocaust. Most Americans, 80%, have not visited a Holocaust museum, and 2/3, 66%, do not know or know of a Holocaust survivor. Newspaper articles reported nearly 2/3 of US young adults unaware 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, and 63% of millennials, Gen Z, unaware of key Holocaust facts. These findings were echoed in surveys of other countries. While it is possible to critique the design of the survey or to suggest that it was written in a way to highlight the ongoing need for Holocaust education, it also suggests decades of high-quality Holocaust educational projects have not been successful enough. Despite the best efforts of educators, scholars, and survivors, Holocaust memory and knowledge continue to be vulnerable. This is evidenced not only by these surveys, but through the rise of hate crimes, anti-Semitism, racism, and nationalist violence. The sheer number of testimonies in the USC Shoah Foundation presents a bulwark against forgetting, but the presence of the holographic projections suggests anxiety about the future, a concern that all the efforts thus far are not enough. As someone who has spent over 2 decades teaching the Holocaust, I report this with my own anguish, my own feeling of not enough that inherently overlays the project of Holocaust education. I offer today's remarks not out of that grief, however, but as a way of moving forward, however uncertainly, in this traumatized world. Doing so requires that we move forward with trauma, with our grief, and with anxieties about the future of Holocaust memory. I see the holographic projections as cultural objects whose force lies not in their ability to replicate a previous encounter, talking to Holocaust survivors, but in their ability to evoke a new kind of encounter, one that acknowledges the vulnerability of human beings and our memory projects. Seeing the projections in this way requires us to be unsettled by them, rather than assimilating them into the realm of the familiar. And with that, we will turn to memory, and specifically unsettling memory. Because I live near the Illinois Holocaust Museum, I've had the opportunity to see the first exhibit of the hologram, this one of survivor Pinka Scooter. The technology has already become much smoother, more lifelike since that time. This is, of course, what the technologists want. But I am concerned that as the holograms become smoother and smoother, they may lose their alterity that could strengthen our ability to remember. The holograms are uncanny in their lifelike appearance, and were even closer to the uncanny valley in their earlier incarnations. The uncanny valley is a well-known concept in near-human representations, originally developed by robotics engineer Masahiro Mori. Mori's 1970 paper, The Uncanny Valley, focused on robots, arguing that while robots with humanoid qualities seem familiar, as the robot approaches human qualities too closely, the viewer becomes uncomfortable. A project such as Dimensions in Testimony relies on the ability of the technology to overcome the uncanny valley enough that students will engage with the holographic survivors and will accept the hologram as a valid representation, just as students accept video testimony as a valid representation of a survivor. The project doesn't seek to replicate survivors or to fool students into thinking that they are with a living survivor, but rather to create an engaging experience focused on Holocaust recounting, rather than on the technology. The Dimensions in Testimony holograms would appear to be a success, in part because Leslie Stahl said, "I could talk to him for hours," seeming to forget for a moment that she was speaking with a projection. I want to suggest, however, that the hologram can be important for Holocaust memory, even if, indeed, especially if, it draws attention to its own representation. To put another way, it might be fitting for a Holocaust hologram not to make it fully out of the uncanny valley. In an essay on Daniel Libeskind's Jewish Museum in Berlin, James Young uses the concept of the uncanny to develop an understanding of the museum as an uncanny memorial. Young draws on Freud's articulation of the uncanny as, quote, the transformation of something that once seemed familiar and homely into something strange and unhomely, end quote. Young draws on this meaning to suggest the uncanny architecture of certain Holocaust memorials, which point to a memory that cannot be fully brought into the present. He writes, the memorial uncanny might be regarded as that which is necessarily anti-redemptive. It is that memory of historical events which never domesticates such events, never makes us at home with them, never brings them into the reassuring house of redemptory meaning. I want to suggest that holograms of Holocaust survivors might function as an uncanny memorial, an uncanny home for Holocaust memory. There is a danger in using technology to store Holocaust memory, and that is that we might fail to see these memory projects as just that, memory projects, not memory itself. This is, of course, the very danger of USC Shoah Foundation's 54,000 testimonies. The fact that they exist, that they are safely recorded and digitally preserved, might give us the sense that the work of memory is done. In this way, technology can be a bit of a trap. Avoiding this trap requires asking, how can we use the limitations of technology for memory itself? One answer might be to see the uncanniness, the not quite right quality of the holograms as part of the work of remembrance, that in the absence of the survivors, memory should be, in fact, not quite the same. In a video of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center on its website, a group of school children encounter the holographic projection of survivor Fritzi Fritzl. The camera catches the children's faces agog, their mouths literally open. A girl interviewed about the experience said it was just like having Fritzy there. Let me play this for you.
I thought I would die when I was walking towards the
to hear a story and then ask their own questions and literally have a conversation that is just about as lifelike as it could possibly be.
It felt like Fritzy was right there on the stage. I didn't know. If my teachers didn't inform me that it was a hologram, I would have never known. I would think it was just her. It was amazing. It was so powerful hearing Fritzy's story, and I've learned about the Holocaust from multiple different people, but it's a completely different experience just hearing it from her herself. It's learning the Holocaust in a whole new way.
I'm so glad.
If my teachers didn't tell me, she says, it was a hologram, I wouldn't have known. How will students confront the loss of survivors if they have the sense that nothing has been lost? Those of us who have spoken with survivors know what is lost. So for us, perhaps the point may not need to be made. But for a young person who has never talked to a survivor, how can we offer them this experience in all its technological mastery while also using the experience to highlight what has been lost forever? This will require a different relationship to the technology, one that highlights its vulnerability and our own responsibility to protect it. Historicizing technologies of memory offers one such avenue. All media representations of survivors, all recorded testimonies, are envisioned to outlive the survivors, to be houses of memory that respond to the vulnerability of the body. But media itself is also vulnerable. Dimensions in Testimony reflects a significant investment of resources in a technology whose future is uncertain, not because of its particular technology, but because the future of all technology is in fact vulnerable. Stephen Smith, the executive director of USC Shoah Foundation, speaks about future-proofing the interactive biographies. What he means is that the interactive biographies are being filmed in a way that they could later be projected as holograms when that technology is available. But the truth is, there is no true future-proofing of technology. The technology of the interactive biographies shields its audience from these realities, thereby unintentionally shielding the audience from the vulnerability of remembrance. Darnella Frazier took out her cell phone because she knew that George Floyd was in danger. She could not save him, but she could be a witness. Without this sense of peril, she might never have acted. If the holograms are to inspire action, they too must evoke a sense of their own peril, a sense of memory's peril. It's not only that technology cannot save our bodies from their vulnerability. The holographic projections reveal that our bodies might be needed to save technology from its vulnerability. How else can we explain the need for elderly Holocaust survivors to be questioned for an entire week on a hot set before a multitude of cameras? The survivors put their own bodies on the line to create a new technological interface that would respond to the vulnerabilities of previous memorial technologies. And lastly, let us turn to compassion. When we think about compassion in the context of the holograms of Holocaust survivors, we might initially think about compassion born of hearing the stories of survivors. Compassion is literally suffering with, and is generally understood to mean being moved by the suffering of another with a desire to alleviate that suffering. We might hope that hearing the experiences of survivors in any context would increase our sensitivity to suffering more generally. But I have been suggesting a different relationship to the holograms, one that values the holograms not only for the information they share, but for the vulnerability they evidence. This opens up a space to imagine that we might have compassion evoked by the holograms outside of any specific narration of the survivor. For this to happen, we need to invest the holograms with a kind of aura. I use the term in the sense of Walter Benjamin, who famously wrote in his 1935 essay on the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, "That which withers in the age of mechanical reproduction is the aura of the work of art." In part, Benjamin's essay is about loss connected to technology. He is concerned about what is lost when art can be reproduced through photography and film. He writes that even the most perfect reproduction of a work of art is lacking in one element: its presence in time and space, its unique existence at the place where it happens to be. My focus today on locating the time and space of the holograms and our own time and space is in part an effort to imbue the holograms with a sense of aura. In an essay on Benjamin, film scholar Miriam Hansen suggests that Benjamin's understanding of aura and its relation to the past is not necessarily a matter of continuity or tradition. More often than not, it is a past whose ghostly apparition projects into the present and, to evoke Roland Barthes, wounds the beholder. You can see why this reference to ghostly apparitions is evocative for me. I want to use this to ask, what would it take for the ghostly apparitions of the holograms to wound us? Aura adheres to Holocaust survivors as first-person witnesses. Their very presence is understood as authentic and irreplaceable. And while Benjamin was concerned that reproduction would cause the aura of the work of art to wither, the reproduction of Holocaust testimonies across many media has not diminished the aura of the first-person witness. Those of us who have been able to talk to a survivor in person about their experiences didn't feel this experience lessened, even if we had already viewed their audiovisual testimonies. If anything, the existence of those testimonies makes the person-to-person encounter with a survivor more powerful, more singular. In this sense, the work of the USC Showa Foundation and others can be understood as a decades-long effort to maintain the aura of first-person witnesses and their testimonies through technologies whose powers of replication threaten to diminish it. As Holocaust survivors age and pass away or become too frail to speak publicly, the few survivors able to still function as museum docents and school presenters firmly retain the link to their particular time. They are time-situated, unique, and entirely irreplaceable. They look back at us, wound us, and are, despite their closeness to us, distant from us. Unlike the survivor situated in time and space, the holographic survivors shift the focus from the vulnerable human being to the information shared. The student can ask a question and that piece of the video will be played back for them through the magic of natural language processing. But there is no encounter beyond this providing of information. And yet, I want to argue the lifelike holographic projection can maintain a sense of aura and can inspire compassion, a suffering with, if we allow the hologram to wound us. Creating this sense of aura requires that we see the holograms as vulnerable, time-limited, and in need of us. In the 60 Minutes interview, Leslie Stahl asks Aaron Elster, "What's the weather like today?" "I'm actually a recording," he replies. "I cannot answer that question." Stephen Smith also highlights the gap between the representation and the represented in the interview when Stahl asks about the, quote, jiggle right before Pinkas starts to talk. "What you're seeing here isn't a human being," Smith says. "It's video clips that are being butted up next to each other and played. And as it searches and brings the clip in, you're seeing a little bit of a jump cut." I appreciate these moments because these are the moments when you realize that you are watching a recording, nothing more. The visualization is lifelike and compelling, but it is, after all, only a recording left by someone who can no longer speak for themselves. While we sometimes talk about holograms allowing people to live after death, the technology itself is not immune to vulnerability. The indexing might fail, the code might break, future generations might be unwilling or unable to engage with the technology. This is the vulnerability of the seemingly invulnerable hologram. And this is what creates the space of witness, the space of trauma, remembrance, compassion, the recognition that technology and Holocaust memory need us. Imagine a situation in which the hologram speaks to a school child long after the last Holocaust survivor has died. The child sees a video not only of the survivor's life, but of all of their efforts to leave something behind. The oral history on cassette tape, the multiple videos from various moments held in various archives, the film, the paintings, the poems, and yes, eventually this hologram, left as the last effort of someone trying to be heard, knowing the vulnerability of the houses of memory. Such a hologram might indeed look back at that school child, knowing that its own days were limited, and say, "Help me, you're my only hope." Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. That was amazing. So much to think about. We have one question from someone in our audience today, and they're asking if you can please devote a few minutes to discussing new technologies and Holocaust sites, and if there's also time, Holocaust memorial monuments.
Absolutely. So, it's interesting, as I mentioned, that there's that my perspective, I think, about simulation, I'm focusing on holograms here, but that same technology is letting us look at digital spaces in a variety of ways, including at the memorial sites, whether that's actually students being there or the ability to actually walk through spaces when you're not there through virtual reality. And so there's been a variety of digital projects used to help people see differently and to see things that used to be there, but that are not there anymore, right? To be able to walk through empty spaces and see through augmented reality. Like you can hold up basically like an iPad and see what used to be there when you're walking through physical space, or you can be in your home space and be virtually walking through a digital space. So you can see that in a variety of ways, we're playing with and sort of blurring the boundaries between presence and absence, right? Seeing what is no longer there, but was there, and also being in places where we're physically not, but could be. So, there's a variety of really interesting projects now about that.
I'm really taken with the conversation you're having about the uncanny valley. I know, which actually builds on, I think Freud at one point wrote something about the uncanny and this sort of sense of this uncomfortable sense, this sort of unfamiliar yet familiar sense that imbues not necessarily places that are haunted, but even in a house where there's the sense of a memory that's taken place. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about also, are you familiar with Alison Landsberg's work on prosthetic memories? I want to ask that question because one of the things we thought a lot about in putting our exhibition together on the concentration camp system is, even though we have a hallway where this is mounted, we use different wood and stones and bricks, and we have 14 testimonial videos from survivors connected with our community. But the walls are also covered with and filled with images of people in distress, people who have been killed, people who are really, really suffering. And we still are kind of trying to find our way with bringing people through the space and telling the story and having them go through the exhibition as an exhibition, but also spending time worried about the trauma of having them be in there, which reminds me of Alison's concept of prosthetic memories.
That your point raises a few interesting, there's a few interesting dimensions of what you're saying, and one is that we've been working so hard over decades to bring people closer, right? And we've seen the work of memory as bringing people closer. And part of what's interesting, I think, about this contemporary technology is that now we also, and you're talking about with photographs and older technology, but our ability to bring people closer is now greater than ever and getting greater and greater. And so now we have to think about what are the ethical responsibilities of bringing people close, right? And how do you care for people, right? And do we always want to bring people close? Can we sometimes have I think there's been a lot of assumptions in our field that distance is a problem and that closeness is better. And again, I think that sometimes certain kinds of distance can actually be used to help people embody that space of witness, right? And so, I'm interested in talking about closeness and further away. And there's been a number of ways of articulating memory in terms of prosthetic memory and what it means to sort of take on a memory that's not yours, but that you feel this connectedness to. And I think that the technology, including images, of course, gives us a different moral responsibility to consider, right? What does it mean to care for people's trauma as they're walking in that space? How can you make sure that everyone is okay? Because of course that's what we want,
Thank you, Rachel. Along those lines, actually, I have another question for you. So in many of your writings, you've often touched upon your own experiences in the classroom, and you brought up this phrase, pedagogical emotion. And so I'm wondering, building upon the talk today, you'd like to talk a little bit about pedagogical emotion and digital spaces. It was such a joy to see the level of interaction with those students in the video that you showed. And I'm wondering if you have more to share on those pairing of those topics.
Well, yes, I do. And also, I want to make sure that, I'm going to fold in something else that I want to make sure that we also touch on, which is, all of the other digital spaces. So I'm interested in now my work is focusing on digital spaces and their, particular digital technologies and their link to simulation. But even if we think about archives or what it means to send students to a web page, right? And go online and look at these artifacts. And how are we preparing students to think about the differences between going to a digital archive and seeing artifacts online and actually holding those artifacts in your hand? Right? And so I think sometimes as teachers, we're so excited that there's so much available. And now we have so much. Again, I've been doing this, for a long time before all of this was available. So there's a kind of a thrill sometimes in being able to share these things with students. But I think that we're not always as careful in sharing with them the differences between digital spaces and physical spaces. And again, I say this as somebody who's not against digital spaces, right? Who finds a lot of meaning there, but who thinks that as teachers, we need to give our students a language for thinking about what is gained and also what is lost, right? And again, I think, the pandemic has actually given us a foothold because we can start with, remember when we were in Zoom, and how is that similar to being in the classroom and how is it different? And one of the things that happens in the move to digitizing, as we've all experienced, is that what becomes important is the data, is the information, right? And so there's no side conversations here. If we were in a room together, right, there'd be all kinds of information that we'd be getting about each other. And we might be, I might notice, oh, you seem a little down today, or all of those kind of nonverbal things that do not translate as well. How do we give students the language for thinking about why that's meaningful to our work when we talk about the Holocaust? because otherwise, students do often have the sense of, oh, I feel like I've been there, right? Oh, I saw that film, and so I think that I've been to that place. I feel, right? And so how do we give students a language for thinking through the possibilities and also the limitations of this technology?
Thank you. We also have another question from our audience about concern that as technologies continue to improve, that at least at initial encounter, the wow factor of the technology might get in the way of compassionate engagement.
Yeah, such a good point. That's been one of my concerns about the technology as well, that that how do we make, in this case, the survivor, or if it's a virtual reality experience going to Anne Frank's annex, how do we keep the focus on Anne Frank, and how do we use the technology in a way that supports what we really want our students to get, rather than the, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm there, or wow, it's so lifelike, right? And again, some of that's about time. So if you have time with students, then they can process the wow factor, and then you can move to a different space. And I think the problem is if we leave after that, if we leave after the wow, and we don't then invite students to reflect on, right, is that wow a good thing? How is it good? Is it limited? Right. And again, part of what's so difficult about this is that this technology is so new, right, that it's hard for us to, sort of get into a space of distance from it and reflection on it. But I think that's a really important point, that we need to keep the focus on our educational goals as Holocaust educators, for sure.
I think you bring up such an important point, and I was mentioning to you before, Dr. Kerry Lane, who's Associate Professor of English at Queensborough Community College. He's our curator in residence, and he and I were really curious during the pandemic about what impact, if any, hosting virtual programs and having an online exhibition how would it be received by students versus community members? And I think we assumed that, all young people who are much more familiar with the technology, they just assume that you have a website up, and we thought, well, that will connect with them. And it builds on what you were just saying, though, which is actually, it was the opposite, that sure, you have the website, but what really resonates with them is the power of place, is being there. And that, in fact, for our older community members who have much more experience in museums, and especially memorial museums, and a significant number of whom have visited to different atrocity and concentration camp memorials, who already have this sort of experience and understanding of what it's like to not only physically negotiate those spaces, but kind of address the feelings that are coming up. And in many cases, some of the people who visit have personal connections to those sites. But I think it's interesting, and I'm just curious, we have several comments that kind of build on how do you help students in this. And so one person has written in, Ezra Klein recently wrote a New York Times article, a column, and did a podcast about the idea of the medium is the message. And I think this builds on a little bit of what you were talking about, the idea that the medium through which we learn something shapes our brains, so that children who are watching Sesame Street don't learn to love learning, but love to learn to love television. We're curious about the awe. And I say, the awe because over the pandemic, I joined TikTok, and which started off as a lot of dancing and a lot of animals dancing. But soon, my TikTok also is filled with much more pithy content, one of which is a Holocaust survivor named Lily with her great grandson Dove. And so there's Lily and Dove in the world of TikTok, and reading the comments, it's very powerful. And we'd love to just know your thoughts on all of it.
And thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think we bring a lot of judgment often to a particular technology. Like, who among us would have thought, oh, TikTok is a place for Holocaust memory, right? Or when there was that story, Eva's stories on Instagram, right? That again, you can think what you want about it, but it shows that the technology itself, there's nothing about TikTok that says it has to be about dancing and pandas, right? So I think that's such an important point. And how do we help students to get some distance from something that may not be distant to them? So, for example, in a class, I teach a class on representations of the Holocaust. How interesting is it for students to think about, well, what is the difference? Like, what's possible on TikTok? And how is that different than what's possible on Instagram? Because they know, right? When Twitter went from 140 characters to whatever it is now, 280, like that made more things possible. And so that can be a way into thinking about how is it that technology creates kind of conditions of possibility for something. Now, it doesn't mean that this is good for Holocaust memory and that's not, but it means Holocaust memory in this space has to be, I don't even know how many seconds you get for TikTok, but has to be this amount. And in this space, right, it has to be 140 characters and so on. And I think that's a way for students to start to think about, right, why were documentaries 50 minutes? Well, because that's what high schoolers had. And so, right, they start to be able to think about representations and technology and what's possible. Such a good point.
I think we could talk about this for a very long time.
Well, and I think partly it's so, I'm mindful of our time, but I think part of why it's so easy to talk about is because we all have technology, right? We all live with it, whether it's internet technology or, just what we see on our television. And so because it's something that's so familiar, there's something very powerful about trying to make it strange, right? And starting to ask some of those questions.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was amazing.
Thank you so much.
Very much appreciate your time with us today and all the questions that you've answered and also opened up for us. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
I just also want to say on behalf of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much, Ilsa, for hosting. And actually, this conversation is going to continue next Wednesday, the September 28th at noon. We're inviting Dr. David Simon, also as part of the KHC NEH colloquium. He's going to be building on what you've spoken about. And the title of the talk is The Digitization of Genocide Memory. I think I just muted myself, but I'm putting all of this information in the chat for everyone. And again, thank you so much for bringing all of this up and really unpacking all of the nuances that are a part of the holograms. And I really love how you've spoken about being very clear, delineating between testimony and the medium. I think that that's really, really significant. And we're really grateful that you've shared all of your insights with us. Again, thank you, Ilsa. And on behalf of the KHC, thanks to everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you online. Stay safe and be well.